Greetings, folks, and welcome back to A Place to Step Forward. Before I delve into any formalities, let me first state that this is the final video about this perhaps not so uncommon phenomenon. This year, we saw two back-to-back incidents in the span of a week in which the leader of the opposition found their party in shambles and themselves seatless. Not wanting to let any other nation totally steal its thunder, the first of these two instances occurred in Canada. However, that's not the focus of this video. In this second and a halfth part of this quasi-series, I'll delve into a wacky half-decade in Canadian political history, in which 3 times the ruling party was toppled at the polls, and 3 times the Prime Minister was defeated in their own riding. Intertwined in all of this is one of Canada's most famous Prime Ministers and a political crisis betwixt the PM and GG. BUT, let's not waste any more time and delve into one final allotment of embarrassing electoral episodes. Since Canada was granted her independence in 1867, the political scene had been dominated by either the Liberal Party or the first iteration of the Conservative Party. Since the turn of the century, these parties had organized around Wilfrid Laurier and Robert Borden, respectively. The two would come to blows at the polls a total of 4 times. Both men would enjoy comfortable government majorities and lengthy tenures as Prime Minister. The last of these confrontations occurred under some rather zany circumstances on December 17, 1917. This bitterly contested election, fought largely over conscription in the ongoing Great War, saw the Liberal Party split in 2. As a result, a coalition of Borden's Conservatives and the Unionist Liberals defeated Laurier's opposition faction in a landslide, achieving the largest popular vote percentage for any party in Canadian history. However, this election would be the last hurrah for both Borden and Laurier. On February 17, 1919, Wilfrid Laurier died while still leading the opposition. Later that year, an ailing Borden announced his resignation as Prime Minister. Thus, both parties would need to search within their ranks to find a fresh new face, and both parties would find themselves in a much more crowded political field. So, who would take the reins of post-war Canada and lead the country into the 1920s? Arthur Meighen's beginnings were similar to that of most politicians. Law degree, member of the Young Men's Conservative Club, active campaigner for a local politician, the works. In 1908, Meighen was elected to the House of Commons for the Manitoba-based seat of Portage-la Prairie, and was re-elected by comfortable margins in 1911 and 1917. Starting in 1913, Meighen would serve a number of positions in the Borden government, including as the Solicitor General, Secretary of State, and Interior Minister. When Robert Borden resigned, Meighen was chosen by Borden to succeed him as both Conservative leader and Prime Minister, taking office on July 10, 1920. However, across the House floor, Meighen would face off against a new foe, filling the power gap created by the death of Wilfrid Laurier. William Lyon Mackenzie King had more bombastic roots. His maternal grandfather and namesake was the first mayor of Toronto and leader of the 1837 Upper Canada Rebellion. He's also the namesake of the longest river in Canada. Like Arthur Meighen, King attended the University of Toronto in the 1890s, and there is a bit of evidence to suggest the two got to know and dislike each other there. Unlike Meighen, however, King went into journalism for a bit while furthering his studies at the University of Chicago and Harvard, receiving a doctorate from the latter in 1909. A supporter of Laurier and the Liberal Party, King won election to the House of Commons in 1908, sound familiar? In the riding of Waterloo North, Ontario. Not even a year into his parliamentary tenure, Laurier appointed King to be the Minister of Labour. However, in 1911, King was among the Liberal MPs swept out of office when Laurier lost to Borden. 6 years later, King ran for the seat of York North and lost that one too. However, on August 7, 1919, King succeeded the decedent Laurier as leader of the Liberal Party in the first ever leadership convention. Now the opposition leader, King won a by-election to the seat of Prince on Prince Edward Island that October. Alright, we've got our new leaders. Now let's see their first election against each other. Here's a spoiler. Someone's going to lose his seat. By the time Parliament was dissolved on October 4th, 1921, Prime Minister Meighen had more or less secured his control over the Conservative ranks. However, the Unionist government that rallied behind Borden during the war had fractured. In 1920, a number of Unionists, most of whom were former Liberals, by the way, broke from the party to form the Progressive Party. This party, led by former Agriculture Minister Thomas Crerar, championed farmers' protests against the government's support of protective tariffs on farm products. Also galvanizing opposition to the Meighen government were local United Farmers parties in Alberta and Ontario and the Independent Labour Party. In particular, the ILP's leaders had led a strike in Winnipeg 2 years prior, and Meighen played a pivotal role in suppressing it. Meighen didn't help himself either. He strongly defended his and Borden's policies wherever wherever he went, trying to keep the ideals of the Unionist government alive. He even went as far as to defend conscription in Quebec, the epicenter of the 1917 conscription crisis. Despite these clearly bad optics, Meehan was generally well received on the campaign trail, but not at the polls when December 6th came around. Having lost over 100 seats, the Conservatives finished in an embarrassing third place, with the Progressives sweeping the plains to snatch 58 seats. In first place, the Liberals clinched the exact number of seats needed for a majority, though some discrepancies on candidate affiliations have left the majority-minority question unresolved to this day. 6 other seats were captured by United Farmer and Independent Labour candidates. Mackenzie King contested York North again in this election, triggering a rematch. However, King won the seat this time, now finally able to represent his home province after a decade on the sidelines. As for Meehan, he lost his bid for a 4th term to Progressive candidate Harry Leader by fewer than 200 votes. However, just a month later, Meehan won a by-election back into Parliament in Grenville, Ontario. Also, fun fact, since I couldn't fit this anywhere else in the script, this was the first election in which women could vote, and one was even elected from the Progressive column. But anyways, Mackenzie King was now the Prime Minister, and because Crayrar declined to form the official opposition, Meehan now took King's old job in Parliament. Despite the shaky government situation, King managed to hold his own during the 14th Parliament, governing with the quiet support of the Progressives. Balancing the support of his own base, the Quebecois, and the virulently anti-tariff Progressives, King managed to reduce tariffs somewhat and achieve the first budget surplus in a decade. King could also take credit for an economic boom, given this was the Roaring '20s. While King could have continued to govern unencumbered until 1926, a failed budget vote in September 1925 forced Parliament's dissolution and an election for October 29th. Unsurprisingly, King focused his campaign on keeping the good times coming, promising to continue boosting relations between the English and French, a quote, common-sense tariff, and a more sound government than the one at present. Since the last election, Crayrar had stepped down as Progressive leader, being succeeded by Robert Fork. Meehan, as opposition leader, had spent the last 4 years reconsolidating the Conservative opposition to the King government. Though his stances on high tariffs hadn't changed since 1921, he didn't try to defend them to crowds of Western farmers this time. In fact, he basically wrote the West off as a loss and focused on shoring up the vote in the eastern provinces. Going into the election, King had strong hopes, if not outright confidence, that he would be re-elected with a clear majority this time. And there's no reason to criticize him for this. Most parties hold the same mindset. However, once that cold Thursday rolled around, peculiar inverse of the 1921 elections had unfolded. The Tories shot back from third place to victory with 115 seats, falling just 8 short of a majority. The Progressives' vote share crumbled, losing over half their seats and their share of the popular vote. The Liberals came in a somewhat close second, losing only 18 seats and winning basically the same in the popular vote as in 1921. On the local level, Meehan challenged leader again for Portage-la Prairie and won, almost quadrupling the margin from 4 years earlier. Now it was Mackenzie King's turn to lose his seat. York North decided to vote for conservative lawyer Thomas Herbert Lennox, forcing King to run in another by-election. On February 15th, 1926, King swept the vote in the Saskatchewan-based riding of Prince Albert. So this means Meehan becomes Prime Minister again, right? Well, no. King refused to turn over power to the Conservatives, instead betting on the new Kingmaker's support being enough to give him a working majority. The Prime Minister had bet correctly. By insisting that the House of Commons should choose the Prime Minister and meeting with the Progressives' leaders, King was able to continue governing with their support. As an added bonus, the 2 remaining ILP MPs gave King their support after he introduced a bill for old age pensions. Spring would become summer, and Meehan would stubbornly remain as leader of the opposition, while King's new government solidified its position. In June 1926, some very troubling information came out about the Department of Customs and Excise. It turned out that members of the department had conspired with American smugglers to run liquor from the United States into Canada. Even the former customs minister, Jacques Bureau, was implicated, having personally received contraband and protected colleagues from an investigation. Recall as well that this was during Prohibition in the United States and Canada. Though not personally involved, King tried to avoid any discussion of the scandal in the House of Commons, but his luck ran out when the investigatory committee created at the behest of the Tories delivered its report. The Progressives, who'd strongly portrayed themselves as a party of honest governance, very quickly distanced themselves from King in the wake of the scandal. With a vote of censure, which could have brought down the government, becoming an inevitability, King decided to pull the plug while it was still his sovereign decision to do so. On June 26th, King met with Lord Julian Byng, the Governor-General of Canada, to ask for the dissolution of Parliament. Wait, Julian who? Julian Hedworth George Byng was a British military officer who rose the army ranks in Africa before distinguishing himself by leading forces in the siege of Gallipoli and the Battle of Vimy Ridge. Now General Byng was made a lord in 1919, and on August 2nd, 1921, was appointed the Governor-General of Canada by King George V. For those that don't know, a Governor-General basically acts in place of the monarch in Commonwealth countries. Like the monarch, they are supposed to be apolitical, largely fulfilling ceremonial tasks like appointing predetermined prime ministers, dissolving parliament, and dropping the writs of election. Following the 1925 elections, King had met with Byng to ask to form a new government. While Byng told King that it would have been more sensible for King to stand by and let Byng appoint Meehan as prime minister, Byng stood by precedent and accepted King's request. Byng later stated that he also told King that he should not ask for a dissolution should things go south, unless Meehan already had a chance to govern. Now, with King asking for a dissolution, Byng refused to honor the request, arguing that because the Conservatives had won the most seats in 1925, they should form government instead. On June 28th, after 2 days of going back and forth with Byng, Mackenzie King tendered his resignation. Later that day, King declared before the House of Commons that he had resigned as Prime Minister and motioned for the House's adjournment. Following a bit of a parliamentary tussle, King stated, "May I make my position clear? At the present time, there is no government. I am not Prime Minister. I cannot speak as Prime Minister." Meehan continued to demand a conference between himself and the Prime Minister, referring to Mackenzie King, as the parliamentary session in general was ending soon. King then flatly declared, "There is no Prime Minister. May I emphasize that? When there is a Prime Minister, he may come to this House and announce his policy and his wishes." After this, the motion to adjourn passed. Lord Byng then invited Arthur Meehan to form a government, and he took office a second time on June 29th, 1926. At the time, precedents, which somehow hadn't fully died yet, stipulated that Meehan and anyone he appointed to his ministry had to resign from their riding and win it back in a by-election. While Meehan did this, he decided that having too many Conservative MPs resign simultaneously would result in his already unstable government being brought down or otherwise stymied in its attempts to, well, govern. As such, he appointed several Conservative MPs as acting ministers. Mackenzie King attacked Byng and Meehan, stating that the former had basically compromised Canada's independence by overstepping his bounds and defying the legally governing Prime Minister, and as such, Meehan was governing illegally. He stated that unless Meehan's ministers vacated their seats, they had no right to govern. Meehan's government would last a grand total of 4 days, the shortest in Canadian history, before it fell to a vote of no confidence on July 2nd. Enough progressive MPs, not wanting to support the ideologically adversarial Conservative government, had joined the Liberals in voting for the no confidence motion such that it passed by 1 vote. As such, Meehan had to ask Lord Byng for the same dissolution King had just been denied. The Governor-General accepted, and another election would be called for September 14th. In the campaign, King and the Liberals hurled a slew of charges at the Conservatives and Lord Byng himself. By accusing Byng of violating the Constitution, King had opened a huge can of worms, as he doubtlessly angered some pro-royalist voters. However, King was able to position himself as the defender of Canadian independence against Byng and his Conservative lackeys, kicking up a nationalistic flurry among the Canadian populace. This helped voters forget about the customs scandal, which many Liberals worried would overshadow the rest of the campaign. Both the Liberals and Conservatives called each other corrupt throughout the campaign, with King in particular accusing Meehan of ruling illegitimately. The Conservatives responded to these attacks by pointing out that what Byng had done wasn't a totally isolated incident. Australia's Governor-General had refused 2 Prime Ministers' requests for dissolution 2 decades prior, and nobody questioned the legality of these decisions there. Other than this, Meehan continued to run on a platform of high tariffs. Unsurprisingly, this again forfeited seats in the western provinces to the Progressives and Liberals. Speaking of the Progressives, they were falling apart. Robert Fork had quit as the party leader on June 30th, and he'd since formed a splinter party of Liberal Progressives. Fork and 11 others ran as Liberal Progressives, generally with the endorsement of both the Liberal and Progressive parties. The remnant of the Progressive Party, now lacking a leader, still ran candidates, sometimes against Liberal Progressives. As voting day drew nearer, both the Liberals and Conservatives urged the people to grant them a majority, so an end could be brought to the instability in Ottawa. When all the mud had been slung, Mackenzie King and the Liberals won the elections, winning 116 seats and, with the support of the 8 Liberal Progressives elected, a narrow majority. Conservatives were handed an undeniable defeat, losing 24 24 seats and falling back into opposition. Because of the fracturing, the progressive seat and raw vote totals halved once again. Notice as well that the United Farmers of Alberta won a decent helping of seats this time. See, all of the progressive candidates in Alberta ran under the UFA's banner, where they found widespread support. In the end, the UFA and Progressive Party remnants won 11 seats each. Mackenzie King would win Prince Albert again, defeating a conservative lawyer named John Diefenbaker. If that name sounds familiar, then yes, I mentioned this guy in the previous video. On the other hand, Arthur Meighen would be among the 24 Tories unseated in this election, accumulating his second defeat in Portage-la Prairie. This time, Meighen lost to the Liberals' Ewan Alexander McPherson by a somewhat close margin of about 3%. Having lost the seat a second time, Meighen resigned as the leader of the Conservative Party on September 24th and would not lead the opposition. Eventually, once the 16th Parliament opened on December 9th, most of the remaining Progressive MPs threw the support behind King, and this time, it was for good. After leaving Parliament, Meighen moved to Toronto to practice law, working with a Winnipeg-based investment firm. On October 12, 1927, the Conservative Party held its first ever leadership convention, selecting Richard Bedford Bennett as Meighen's successor. Bennett would initially decline Meighen's offers of campaign assistance, which greatly upset the aging XPM. Meighen would later be appointed to the Canadian Senate in 1932, holding leadership positions there until his resignation in 1942. The previous year, Meighen had again become the leader of the Conservative Party, though not leader of the opposition. As a result, Meighen sought a return to the House of Commons, 16 years after his second defeat in Portage-la Prairie. Staying in Toronto, he contested the riding of York South, with a by-election scheduled for February 9, 1942. Meighen faced only one opponent, Joseph Noseworthy of the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation. Now, King and Meighen still viewed each other with contempt, and King decided to send financial resources to Noseworthy's campaign in order to screw Meighen over. However, York South was a comfortably conservative riding, so, obviously, Arthur Meighen cruised to shit. Following this defeat, Meighen retired from politics, dying of heart failure in Toronto on August 5, 1960, aged 86. He would be the Tories' last leader, as they reformed into the Progressive Conservatives the next year. Meighen, though generally viewed as a prolific orator, is not viewed highly among Canadian prime ministers. Most people who even know who the hell he is know him solely as that interlude between Borden and the King governments, and he's probably one of the most forgotten Canadian prime ministers. Sorry, Arthur. Mackenzie King, on the other hand, had a much longer career in politics ahead of him. His government survived until its mandate ended in 1930, when Bennett led the Conservatives to victory and, for the first time in almost a decade, a majority government. In 1935, King would oust Bennett at the polls and finally win a bona fide majority. During his third stint in office, King's responses to the Great Depression helped create the Canadian welfare state. He would also lead Canada through the Second World War, fostering strong ties with Winston Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. In 1945, King would win one final minority government and lose his seat again before retiring from politics for good in 1948, resigning as Prime Minister on November 15th. Louis Saint Laurent would succeed King, maintaining liberal governance until 1957. On July 22, 1950, Mackenzie King succumbed to pneumonia at the age of 75. In stark contrast to Borden, Meighen, Bennett, and Saint Laurent, King is viewed as one of Canada's greatest and most influential prime ministers. Perhaps not coincidentally, he's also Canada's longest-serving prime minister, with a combined 21 years in office. As for Lord Byng, his tenure as Governor-General had already ended by the 1926 elections, and he returned to Great Britain on September 30th, 1926. On refusing King's dissolution request, Byng stated, "I have to await the verdict of history to prove my having adopted a wrong course, and this I do with an easy conscience that, right or wrong, I have acted in the interests of Canada and implicated no one else in my decision." In 1928, Byng was elevated to the title of Viscount and was promoted to the rank of Field Marshal in 1932. He died at the age of 72 from an abdominal blockage on June 6, 1935. And the King-Byng affair wouldn't just go away after the 1926 elections, no. Mackenzie King made sure it was a topic of discussion at that year's Imperial Conference. However, some monumental changes for the Dominions would come as a result. Firstly, the Balfour Declaration of 1926, named for someone else from the previous video, declared the British Dominions constitutionally equal in status to the United Kingdom. In turn, this declaration would, in part, lead to the passage of the Statute of Westminster in 1931, which granted significant degrees of sovereignty to the Dominions. Never again would a Governor-General refuse the advice of the Canadian Prime Minister. Government crises were limited solely to the doings of Parliament from now on. And if you're looking for other instances in which a Governor-General interfered in domestic political affairs, then look no further than Australia. again. There, a full-blown constitutional crisis occurred when, in 1975, Governor General John Kerr outright dismissed Prime Minister Gough Whitlam. But... let's go! In conclusion, Canada seems to have a special attraction to unseating their sitting heads of government, and the drama surrounding the King Byng affair only strengthens that sentiment. In the end, both Arthur Meehan and Mackenzie King racked up a humiliating number of local defeats, let alone the national ones. King lost his seat 3 times, once as Prime Minister, and failed to capture a seat once. And Meehan lost his seat twice, both times as Prime Minister, and lost a by-election that was supposed to revive his political career. I find that, having made 3 videos on this phenomenon, my original description of it as a humorous rarity seems a bit more short-sighted. As stated previously, this is the final video I'm making on this topic. I'll leave the rest of the rabbit hole uncharted for you to explore as you please. After all, I've only described 15 instances, and while almost half of them occurred in that one country, we looked at 6 countries in 115 years over the course of over a year now. But with that, I'll bid you all bye-bye. If you have any thoughts worth thinking, think about leaving them in the thinkments. Also, lick the subscribe button, but don't like the lick button. What the fuck am I even saying? And drink your water, and stop falling over, eh?